to another Family Troubles podcast. Today it's my great pleasure to have on Celia Flinn. Celia is a school-based therapist in the Bay Area, and I heard Celia speak about sibling estrangement at a recent conference, and just really impressed by her perspective, both as a therapist and as a family member. And it's just so helpful to hear directly from people who've been through an estrangement and kind of have found their, how they've sort of made sense of it and experienced it and that kind of thing. So for you, Celia, can you tell us a little bit about your family and what happened when your sibling became estranged from your parents, how it affected them, how it affected you, all that kind of thing?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I'm sorry if you'll see my cat jumping up on my lap during this. He's jumping on me.
We welcome
But
additional members. Yeah.
thank you. Um, yeah. So my family unit is my parents, me and my siblings. So we're 17 months apart. I'm younger. And about 10 years ago, my siblings started a pattern of on again, off again estrangement with me that has resulted in a full estrangement of my father and a partial estrangement, on again, off again estrangement from my mom. Around 2014, my sibling came out as gender non-binary,
Uh,
and they, introduced themselves, their true authentic selves, and wanting to live as how they were. And I don't attribute the estrangement to their identity, but I certainly think that the friction of the new identity contributed to some of the family conflict that was happening at the time. Um,
yeah,
we
sure.
we did start going to family therapy all together at that time.
Yeah.
And in fact, my therapist is the same person who did a couple sessions of family therapy with my family all
Uh-huh.
those years ago.
Mhm.
I kept her after we ceased doing family therapy together, which has been
Oh,
very
sure, why
helpful for
not?
me.
If you find a good
Yeah.
therapist, you hang on to them for dear life, right?
Absolutely. And it's, she got a front row seat to a lot of the dynamics that I've been discussing. So it was really helpful to me.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah. So in that time, as I mentioned, I've been on again, off again in communication with my sibling with some periods of time, as long as years of no contact. Um, and for my parents, it's been interesting to see how the dynamic is different for me than it is for my parents, but also we share a lot of similarities in our experience of the estrangement because
Sure.
we're being estranged by the same person. So,
Yeah. Well, how would you describe that difference? Because I think it is common that for siblings, it's a very different kind of experience. So how would you characterize that?
yeah, I think what's made it more complicated in my family dynamic is there have been periods of time where my sibling was not communicating with my parents, but was communicating with me.
Uh-huh.
And that put me in a very interesting dynamic with both my parents and my sibling, where I felt that I had to choose a side, or I
Right.
felt I had to be a middleman.
Yeah.
I've reflected on the various roles that I've felt I've had to play in this new dynamic of our family unit, when we met at the conference that you mentioned. And
Hmm.
one of those is as the middleman. And, for years I was the only person that my sibling would talk to. And so I felt that a lot of the communication that I had with my parents was regarding how is sibling doing, or what can you share about. And I,
Right.
I wanted to be respectful of their decision to make this estrangement, but I also wanted to be, I was very empathetic to my parents who were really struggling and wanted to know that their child was safe and
Sure.
that things were well.
Hmm. What did you feel like you sort of had to be either the good kid to kind of hold up the family, honor his parents, and remind them that they were really good parents and they don't deserve this and that kind of thing? And if so, did that cost you in some ways emotionally?
Yeah, I would say so. I think that, it's interesting. I've thought about this, that it's my dynamic in my family unit has almost transformed from the youngest sibling to now almost an only child. And
Yeah.
so, in that way, there has been some added pressure of being the good kid,
Yeah.
the kid who showed up, the kid who stayed.
Right.
I think when I was in my early adulthood, I'm 32 now. So when this was all happening, I was 22. My brain was not fully developed. I did not have as many coping skills as I have access to now.
Sure.
And there was an instinct in me of, well, how come I can't be the one to blow everything up? Why can't I just, you
Yeah.
know, ruin this family event because I'm the one who has to keep it all together all the time. Obviously, that's
Yeah.
not a very mature
Well,
stance, but it was coming from a place of pain.
well, not only that, but you're right. It does sort of foreclose kind of the options of identity that a sibling has. If one kid's kind of taking up all the space of pain in the family, it would make it feel more selfish or guilt-inducing to if you wanted to act out in some ways, or
Hmm.
maybe you had similar complaints as your sibling, or let's say you wanted to practice being difficult or rebellious or something.
Right.
It kind of makes that option much more, yeah, much more foreclosed to you. So I don't think, yeah, I don't even think of it as an immaturity. I just think it's sort of a fact that if one sibling occupies a particular place in the family system, it does sort of close off that option for the other. So it makes it much harder. And particularly if you're kind of come into the world as a fairly empathic person, which I suspect that you are.
Hmm.
So yeah,
Yeah, and I think that the roles reversed from our childhood where I was never a bad kid and I didn't get in much trouble, but I was the younger child and my sibling was very gifted academically. So it was like I went from this not like it's extreme to say I was the disappointing child because I was not, and I was very loved by my parents, but I was
sure.
not the one to be relied on. And then all of a sudden, I am the only one to be relied on, and so that was a big shift in my identity as becoming a young adult.
Yeah. Well, were there sort of assets to that as well? Kind of now you're sort of front and center and can kind of get all the parental attention, or was that more of a burden, would you say?
I think it's both, and I think that
Yeah.
it helped me to grow up and mature in a way that I was confronted with this. And I think sometimes it feels like a burden when I think about the future. So I think about being the only person who will be responsible for caretaking for my parents as they age. And, that I worry that who's going to help me with this? I yearn for that sibling connection with a partner in crime to support my parents going through these changes. Their parents are older and have passed away, and so I'm watching them caretake for their parents and seeing how their dynamics with their siblings are. And some
Mhm.
some are good and some are bad, but
Of
they
course.
have people who are there to support them. So I guess there's a sense of loss there that will be on my shoulders. Life is long. I don't know if that will be, but I worry for the future that it will fall to me.
Yeah, you're describing almost a kind of loneliness if you don't have a sibling that you can bounce ideas off of or share responsibilities for or share complaints. I mean, all of our, we all have complaints about our parents. And did that make you feel just this issue of kind of complaining about parents? Did you feel like, well, gosh, now I can't tell my parents I have either the same complaints as my sibling or different ones because they're already suffering so much?
I think there's a bit of that. I definitely feel more sensitive to how I approach issues with my parents because I never want to trigger their pain of estrangement or make them fear that I would also estrange them.
Yeah,
Especially my mom. I think it's been, my mom is a hilarious person, and so sometimes she'll joke, "Oh, I don't want to push you too far," but I'm like, I know it's coming from a true place that it would be incredibly painful to have both children not speak to her anymore. So I think I I'm careful with how I bring my complaints or my issues with my parents to them.
right.
Um, my husband and I are actually moving in with my parents
Oh,
when
wow.
we get when we move back to the East Coast in August. And
Right.
so it's a negotiation of how will we manage this new closeness after being on the opposite side of the country for 6 years.
Yeah. Well, that'll
Yeah.
be interesting.
I might need to call you.
Yeah, feel free. Feel free. Um, well, that's good though. I mean, because it speaks to the fact that there must be a fair amount of closeness with you and your parents at this. Well, it sounds like you've always been close to them
Yeah.
from what I'm hearing, but it sounds like whatever sort of noise was created by your siblings' estrangement is largely in the background at this point and doesn't feel like it's a big obstacle to having a close relationship with them. Is that right?
I think so. Yeah, I mentioned in the talk that I gave at the conference around this idea of the glass child. That is a
Mm,
term that really came to be when around a sibling of someone who has a disability or an extreme medical condition that takes up a lot of emotional or financial or physical space in the family unit.
yep, yep.
And there have been times where I've related to that label of, you know, I'm right here. Why are you seeing through me? To
Mm,
look to my
mm,
siblings' issues or the fact that they're not here, or to lament that you wish things were different.
right.
And I think that when I was able to give voice to that feeling with my parents and say, what can we enjoy a family vacation that is not the four of us anymore? And I'm here, and I don't want our time together to be lamenting that things are different in our family unit, or
Yeah.
there's a ghost here and we can enjoy just being together.
Yeah.
I think that really opened my parents' eyes to my experience of the estrangement, and
Yeah.
they've course corrected, which I'm very grateful for. And it doesn't feel like our time together is spent wishing that someone else was there or hoping that things were different. We can just enjoy being together.
Yeah.
But yeah, there were many years where I felt that feeling of, you're seeing through me looking for someone who's not here. And that
Mm.
was a hard feeling to have.
Of course, yeah, that makes sense. The glass child, I love that. Did you invent that, Celia, or is that another?
No, no, I did not.
I hadn't heard it.
It Yeah, it mostly, I haven't used it in term I haven't heard it used in terms of estrangement, but
Uh,
for for instance, if it's a sibling of a kid who has a disability or a medical condition.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard for the whole family because the person who's in your position, who's, and is probably a lower maintenance child, doesn't require all this parental intervention, and in some ways can feel like they're kind of the good child, which is both a burden and an asset,
Hmm.
but can also feel in a certain way kind of neglected because parents can feel like, well, geez, all hands on deck for this other kid who
Yeah.
has these enormous challenges. We're sorry, sweetheart, but you look like you're doing fine. You doing fine? Are you okay?
Right.
Good. We
Right,
need to
right.
focus on your sibling because they're drowning over here. So we're going to pay attention to them. And if you're, kind of good natured or an empathic child or, just caring person, you're probably going to be kind of instinctively more like, oh no, let's go ahead. I've got this.
Hmm.
Pay attention to them, but end up feeling or even being a little bit neglected around that. And I have heard from other adult children who later estranged themselves, even if their sibling didn't estrange, that they felt like, gosh, so many resources in the family went to my troubled sibling,
Hmm.
and I just felt like I had to kind of be the performative one who was going to make you guys look good, and I ended up being neglected, and can spin out into you didn't love me, you didn't care, which I don't think is typically the case. I think it's just sort of a kind of a blindsidedness on the part of the parent, but it's good that you were able to tell them that. I'm sure they were grateful for that.
Yeah. And I think, I'm a mental health professional, and I think the reason I became a therapist is because of my experience with my sibling and in our family unit. And
Hmm.
my first job out of graduate school, I was working in a homeless services agency in San Francisco in the Tenderloin for 18 to 24-year-old youth, a lot of whom were estranged from their families.
Yeah.
And I think that experience gave me an immense amount of perspective into the pain and the suffering that my sibling was going through.
Mm.
And, you know, I'm supporting these young people who are estranged from their families while I'm experiencing this estrangement as on the side of the
Yeah.
family. And so it was a really unique experience that was challenging and also very, very helpful in my healing, because it
Hmm.
allowed me to understand or gain some perspective into what my sibling must have been going through. And I think that something that I try to impart on my parents and also any family or parents who are going through estrangement is that it's a really challenging choice to make. I mean, no one is going to do this willy-nilly, or I
Hmm.
wouldn't think so. It's a lot to cut the cord on the people who are your resources, whether that be financial or emotional. And most people don't make that choice lightly. You know, you must be going through an immense amount of turmoil to make that decision. And how I feel so sad for my sibling that they're going through this and that they've gone through this, as I'm sad for my parents.
Sure.
And I don't think that two things have to exist in a vacuum.
Hmm. Hmm. No, I think that's really well said and important for parents to kind of know that and hear that perspective. And so, did I understand that you are currently estranged from your sibling, or you're not?
Well, I wouldn't say we have the relationship that I yearn for as a younger sibling who always looked up to their older sibling. Um, I think the last time we talked was about a couple months ago. So
Oh,
I'll intermittently hear from them.
yeah.
Um, I think that the boundaries that I have put for myself just to support in the to not have that feeling of I'm waiting on the stoop for someone to come pick me up.
Yeah.
I don't reach out usually first,
Okay.
unless it's, to share family news. Like recently my our grandmother passed away, and I did reach out to share that family news. Thank you. But I think there was a long period of time in my relationship with my sibling that I was hoping for something different and constantly being disappointed when that something different didn't happen.
Sure.
And so instead of continuing to go down that track, I was, sat down with myself and my therapist and said, these are the boundaries that I need to have in order to keep myself protected.
Hmm.
And I'm not doing the first outreach.
Hmm.
It's a welcome surprise when they call me and they want to ask about how I'm doing and not and seem to want to engage in a sibling that way, which has happened a couple times, but
Uh-huh.
a lot of the times it's a call of I need support or I need this. And I've imparted this, that I'm a therapist, but I'm not your therapist, and I can't be. So
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
I want to show up for you in a way that I can, but I also need to take my boundaries and hold my space to protect myself.
Yeah. So you've had to, in some ways, do that both with your sibling and your parents, huh?
I'm better at doing that with my sibling than I am with my parents. I'll say that.
How come? Why do you think that's true?
I think because my relationship with my parents feels so giving and reciprocal
Uh-huh.
that it's easier for me with my sibling to say these are my boundaries, and this is what I'm putting in. I see what you're putting in. I don't like it. But with my parents, especially my mom, my sibling has experienced suicidal ideation for many years, and I think I am not a parent, so I cannot understand the stress of hearing that your child is going to die
Right.
imminently.
Sure.
So I have a lot of empathy for my mom when, if she will hear something that alarms her from my siblings, she'll call me and want me to check in. And I think I've gotten better about saying, I'm not going to do this today. I will tomorrow. I hear you. I want you to call me and tell me that you're feeling this way, but I don't want you to call me and tell me, hey, do something about this,
Uh-huh.
because there's
That's
nothing I can do about
right.
it.
Yeah.
So I hold space for her emotions around experiencing this, but I no longer, get on a plane or drive to wherever they are to try to fix the situation, because it's not my situation to fix.
No, you don't have the power to do it, and that's
Yeah.
one of the things I want parents to hear. In the
Yeah.
sense that, even if you were super close to your sibling and in daily contact, you still don't have the power to move
Hmm.
the needle, and nobody else does. I mean, if the needle is going to be moved, it's going to be moved because the parents are, for whatever reason, able to influence that relationship.
Yeah.
But a person who's decided that they're better off being estranged isn't going to be compelled by a
No.
close relationship with a sibling or your grandparent or anybody. It's ultimately their call to make. But I wanted to circle back a little bit to talk about what it was like for you to see your parents be in so much pain, and really you were, fairly young when this
Hmm.
happened. But what was that like for you?
Really hard. I
Yeah.
mean, I think most kids see their parents as infallible when they're younger, and to see them experiencing such pain and be so impacted, especially by someone who I care about so much.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, I think throughout my life, I always saw myself as a partner with my sibling, and my parents are partners, and that was our family unit, and it was us four. And
Hmm.
so it's like, well, my own teammate is causing this harm. And so
Right.
even though I know it wasn't my responsibility, I think it took me a long time to release responsibility or ownership or
Hmm.
feelings of guilt, especially during the phase where I was in contact and my parents weren't. I think it was hard for me to not feel somewhat aligned with the person causing them harm in that case. So that was challenging. But I think I will say both of my parents are very emotional people and have been my whole life. So I think we do have a good dynamic of being able to express emotions openly to one another. And I'm very grateful to that because I think if I hadn't had the space to explain how I was feeling and hear how they were feeling when I was younger, a teenager and in my early 20s, it would be harder for me to maintain this open and honest connection that I have with them today. That's, led me to move back to
Yeah.
Jersey to be with them.
Good job, mom and dad.
Yeah.
Parents, I mean, more journalists will sometimes say, well, how can somebody prevent a future estrangement? And I have lots of thoughts about that, but I'm curious how you would answer that as a therapist and a
Hmm.
sibling who's had a sibling who is estranged. Um, because one of the things you're saying is that their openness sort of
Hmm.
is helpful to you. And do you have any
Yeah.
thoughts about that?
Yeah. And this is actually a quote that I borrowed from my own therapist when I was talking about how I was going to show up for this conference and give this speech. But the opposite of estrangement is communication. The biggest responsibility that we have when communicating in a healthy relationship is to tolerate hearing everything, even if it's hard.
There we go.
So communication is not just sharing your emotions, but sitting with others' truths. And I
Yeah.
think that sometimes is the missing piece for people that I'm so open and I'm sharing how I feel, but are you making space for the other person or the other people to be open about how they're feeling?
Yeah.
And that's what allows for everyone to feel seen, and we might not agree with their perspective or we might not understand it, but if we're making space for it, really truly trying, I think that could be the antidote for estrangement in my eyes. I you know I
No, I think
I'm
it's
I'm
really
still
said.
hopeful.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really a good point I had on my podcast yesterday, Alfonso James, which will probably have launched by the time our episode launches. And he's a black man who was wrongly imprisoned from the age of 17 till 50. And then
Wow.
while he was in prison, he kind of, after many, many difficult years, learned kind of how to forgive people and develop this whole program around forgiveness. And I said to him, well, what some of the parents in my practice will really feel very mad at their kid and
Hmm.
bitter, and that they feel like they gave their child everything and now they're estranging themselves. I said, what advice would you give these parents? And he said something very similar to what you're saying, Silly. He said, I wouldn't give them advice, I would just listen
Hmm.
and try to
Yeah.
understand. And
Yeah.
I think it's particularly hard for parents, particularly parents of the past 3 or 4 decades or so, have in many ways been more insightful, more dedicated materially,
Hmm.
emotionally more, they probably maybe have their own therapy, et cetera. Many have given their children a life that they would have, loved somebody to have given them. So when an
Yeah.
adult child says, you failed me, you neglected me, you traumatized me, you hurt me, I think the reaction is like, the hell I did. I would have killed that
Yeah.
like, what are you
Right.
talking about? Are you out of your mind? Which is the opposite of listening, and
Yeah.
so I'm forever at odds. I mean, forever trying to tell parents that just listening it's an incredibly important skill. Listen to understand. You don't have to agree.
Yeah.
per se. But ideally, you would find the kernel of truth and take some responsibility and show some
Hmm.
empathy and find some way to acknowledge that there is some aspect of truth in what the other person is saying. Because nothing's going to happen otherwise. As soon as we make somebody feel
Yeah.
defensive, game over, right?
And I think there's a lot of vulnerability in being able to share your truth, but I think there's even more vulnerability in being able to hear someone else's.
For sure. Yeah.
Because, it's so easy to jump to that defensive place. It's so easy to say, well, wait a minute, I saw it differently. But if
Yeah.
if you're able to let your guard down in order to hear someone's truth, then that is a real act of vulnerability and
Right.
strength.
No, yeah, completely agree with that. Well, it sounds like you were benefited by having a therapist who wasn't just saying, at least as far as I've heard so far, yeah, you should cut off your parents as well.
Yeah.
But what do you have thoughts about the kind of mistakes therapists could make or would make in this sort of environment?
That's an interesting one. And as a therapist who has been working with people who were estranged from their families, I think that there there might be a misconception around boundaries, that
Mhm.
boundaries means cutting everyone off.
Right.
And I think I to my core, I believe in community, and I think that our first community is our family of origin. And
Mm.
it doesn't mean that you have to make connections with that family, or be part of that family forever, if especially if they're abusive. But I
Sure.
think that when we think about community, and I'm really interested in concepts like restorative justice, where
Mm.
one of the reasons that our our individualistic society alienates so many people is because there's this cast out or cast away
Hmm.
um, instinct, I guess, to, instead of trying to repair, instead of trying to understand, there's this instinct to just cut off or move on or be on your own.
Right.
And I think that for me, community is healing. And whatever community you find in order to do that healing is great. That could be your family of origin, or that could be friends or therapy group or whatever that may be. But I
Hmm.
think whenever, if a therapist is encouraging an immediate cutoff without reflection or without support in understanding that with repair comes so much strength and
Hmm.
independence and growth. And I think that there might be that could be a misstep of a therapist to push for that without exploring first if there's an opportunity for repair.
Right.
I always share the quote with some of the kids that I work with as in a school therapist. It's like drinking poison and hoping someone else dies. It's like
Mhm.
you're holding on to all this pain and all
Right.
this hurt, and it doesn't impact that person at all.
No.
Repair is what sets you free. It's not even for the other person.
Hmm.
And you can get right with them on your own, but because I believe so much in community, I think that the best way is to get right with them and in
Yeah.
conversation with them, in relation with them. So I think if a therapist is just jumping to, nope, that's your boundary, don't speak to them, then they're ignoring the healing that comes with repair.
Yeah, no, I think that's really well said. And they're ignoring that they're cutting out a potentially enormously powerful resource of
Yeah.
wisdom and time and energy and history. And, sometimes if there's grandchildren, they get cut out as well. So
Yeah.
I do think our therapeutic society is way too quick to recommend cutoffs and support cutoffs. And to your point, the research, I don't know if you're familiar with Iris Mouse's research at UC Berkeley, MAUSS, I believe. I think it's two S's. Anyway, she found that in those
Yeah.
societies, unlike ours, where happiness is defined in terms of the group participation and group identity, people are much happier than they are in highly
Yeah.
individualistic countries like ours, where it's, what do I have to say about my identity and my
Hmm.
individuality and my boundaries and my purpose and my growth, because it really is through connection that we develop resilience and meaning and purpose. So, um,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of identity, you'd said that your sibling part of that that they were gender non-binary, and
Hmm.
do you think that that was a partly a trigger to the estrangement? I mean, in terms of their coming out, or the requests of your parents, or
Hmm.
other aspects, or if you don't want to go there, you don't have to. But
No, we can go there. I think that my parents are boomers, and I
mhm,
think for their generation, it is harder to get on board with the gender stuff. And I
sure,
think especially the use of a they pronoun was really challenging for my dad, and not as an identity thing, but just a grammatical thing.
yeah,
Um, I grew up super Catholic, so a lot of the ideas that we were raised in are very binary. So being a non-binary person in that space, I can imagine be really challenging and feel really alienating.
hmm,
So I think that definitely was a huge impact. And I think there are a lot of things around my siblings' identity that were, I don't want to say crafted, because I know that they are who they are, but almost maybe in a reaction to how we grew up.
hmm,
So
sure,
wanting to be individual, wanting to be different, wanting to be other, and feeling other, and wanting to
hmm,
find an identity that best fits who they are, and reflects their experience, that maybe is not so cookie cutter,
right,
heteronormative,
yeah,
Christian. And I really respect that, because I think that it's incredible to be different. It's incredible to be unique. And
yep.
um, yeah.
Yeah, that there's a kind of a courage that can come from walking down that path. And there can be a kind of a courage of separation, particularly if you come from kind of good, loving home, which maybe your sibling wouldn't identify in that way. But I think
Hmm.
that some people who later say, oh, it wasn't so loving, it's in part because they didn't really get to feel as separate, not because of any particular mistake on the parents' part, but because they
Yeah.
just didn't really get to feel separate. And so they need to kind of carve out an identity that's very different from
Hmm.
the family system and the family culture. And certainly being gender non-binary or transitioning can be a form. And I'm not saying, I'm not pathologizing either. I'm just saying it is one avenue
Yeah.
of many to establish one's own identity that might not be as available otherwise.
And I think when you have a parent who, or both parents, but I'm particularly thinking of my mom, who would self describe as a helicopter parent during our
Mhm.
childhood,
Yeah,
it makes sense that there's this reaction to that
yeah.
of, I need to be my own person. My mom likes to tell this story that we look a lot alike. And when I was little, everyone would say, "Oh, you're your mom's mini me. You're her mini me." And I would say, she said, I would put my hands on my hips as like a little 5-year-old and say, "I'm my own person." And I see it in myself too, of, I don't
Sure.
want to be put in that box. I don't want to be your mini me. I want to be
No,
me on my own. So I
exactly.
can see, as I'm thinking about starting a family and wanting to have kids, and I think something that comes up for me is, wow, my parents have had this experience. I have all sorts of thoughts, like I have to have 3 kids in case one of them estranges me, and then one kid won't
Sure.
be left alone, and all these
Uh-huh.
calculations that I'm doing. But
Interesting. Yeah.
I think what it comes down to is, we are going to mess up our children. My
Yeah.
husband and I,
Yeah.
my parents did, his parents did, everyone's parents in some way
Some way.
harms their kids
Yeah. It's true.
with the best intentions.
Exactly.
Even reading every book, doing everything right, that will happen.
Hmm.
So I think the lessons I want to take into parenthood as I think about becoming a mom is making space for a kid to tell me their experience.
Hmm.
Because I think if my sibling, and I don't want to rewrite history, but if my sibling had had more space to feel safe in sharing their experience or heard, I wonder if, because I felt that I had that, or I grew to have that, but maybe it came later, and they cut off before it came.
Right.
So I I think that I want to bring those lessons of my own childhood and my parents into my being a parent, and knowing that inevitably I'm going to do something that's going to eventually traumatize or harm or scar my kid in some way, and just knowing I'm going to try my best.
Yeah, I think it's all that any parent can ask of themselves because you're right. I mean, children bring their own challenges into the equation for parents that can create this negative feedback loop,
Yeah.
and parents bring their own histories of trauma or neglect, or maybe they're in a difficult marriage, or maybe they're a single parent, or they're
Yeah.
financially strapped. I mean, there's just so many things that affect the parent-child relationship, and that's why, the idea that one can have a perfect or an ideal childhood is pretty wrong, because it just doesn't.
Yeah.
That just doesn't really happen.
Just sets you up for failure to
Oh, it
have
does,
that
yeah,
thought.
yeah. I mean, I wonder about, so this is more your generation than mine, that, the notion of gentle parenting, 'cause I'm not sure that that's going to be the
Mm.
corrective that the younger generation sort of imagine it will be, because I think part
Hmm.
and parcel of that is building in this idea that Jonathan Haidt talks about of safetyism, that, really wanting to
Yeah.
protect your child from too much stress, and in some ways, understanding every feeling isn't necessarily an asset. I mean, I think, boomers probably started somewhat with that because we were, kind of the first era of generation of helicopter
Hmm.
parenting, really paying attention to our children's needs and feelings and aspirations. But I think that that's just become on steroids. And I think
Yeah.
right. And I think the downside to that is that not every feeling, there's a certain utility and value and strength that comes from just having to work shit out yourself, right? Your
Yeah.
feelings, whatever,
Absolutely.
yeah, just whatever
I,
you
I
feel.
think that something that I want to foster in my future children, like I want to foster in myself, is resilience and self-management. And I
Mhm.
think when when gentle parenting becomes permissive, or let me put a band-aid on this for you, or let me fix
Right,
this for you, you can't fix something for everyone,
right,
and
exactly.
especially your kid. I think that doesn't allow space to teach resilience and
Right,
empowerment. I think ultimately it's you want your kid to be independent. You want your kid to feel strong and empowered. And how are they going to do that if they don't know how to support themselves or self-soothe?
right, exactly. Well, and that's what I don't know if you've read much Donald Winnicott in your training, but
No.
he's considered one of the fathers of object relation theories, and
Uh-huh.
he talked about the concept of the good enough mother. And
Right.
part of the concept of the good enough mother is that it isn't, we don't really want a parent to be perfect, because then the child isn't really pulled upon to draw upon their own resources. So he
Yeah.
talks about the importance of transitional objects like a pacifier or a blankie,
Mm-hmm.
and they're
Mm-hmm.
transitional between the parent nurturing the child and the child's own capacity to do that themselves.
Yeah.
I just think it's such a rich way of understanding our kind of evolution as humans, and how we become the way that we are. So.
Yeah.
Well, this has been great, Celia, and I think it's going to be super helpful to my listeners. Any kind of final mistakes that you think that the advice you would give, in addition to listening and understanding? Um, uh,
Yeah. I think I'll just share what I shared at the end of my talk,
yeah,
for the estrangement conference that we went to, that if I would give this advice to a parent who's experiencing estrangement, that your emotions are valid and they're yours to manage.
that's a good
So
point. Yeah,
it's not fair of me to be a pain to everyone else just because I'm experiencing pain, even
mhm,
though that's really tempting. And when you're cultivating a deeper connection to the parts of yourself that are in pain, you can better understand your needs and the supports that will be helpful, and you can maintain your boundaries and avoid triggers. So when we're dysregulated, when we're triggered, it's so easy to act out of this place of urgency or reactivity or defensiveness,
yeah,
but there's so much power in slowing down
hmm,
and being, and it's going back to the self-soothing piece, that
yeah,
when I see this so much within my family unit, from all of us. I mean, we all do this, but if if we can slow down and not act out of urgency or defensiveness, and manage our emotions before jumping into a conversation, or attempt at communication, I think that that will just serve everyone around us.
I think that's brilliant and a great place to end our podcast. So thank you so
Great.
much, Celia. I think that was really super helpful. Great to hear you again, and yeah, hope you'll stay in touch.
Yes, definitely. Thank you so much, Tosh.
If
Take
you
care.
found this helpful, please follow the podcast and leave a review. It helps other people find the show who could benefit from it. If you want to learn more about my work, you can visit me at www.drjoshuacoleman.com. That is drjoshuacoleman.com, or subscribe to my Substack, Family Troubles. Hope to see you in one of those places soon. Take care.